Welcome back to the channel, where ordinary stories from history often turn out to be not so ordinary after all. Tonight I want you to take a step back in time with me, not just in your imagination, but in your senses, in your body, and the way you might actually drift towards sleep. Because our story begins in one of the most fascinating and surprisingly cozy environments of the past, the Viking longhouse. Now, when most of us hear the word Viking, we picture something loud and chaotic. Warriors with axes, roaring seas, and sails whipping in the wind. But what if I told you that behind those dramatic images lies another side to Viking life? One that was soft, intimate, and deeply human. A world not of conquest, but of rest. A world where, in many ways, people may have slept better than we do today. So let us open the heavy wooden door of a Viking longhouse together. The night outside is brutal. A cutting wind sweeps across snow-covered fields, rattling the pines and biting at your skin. The cold is sharp, the kind that makes every breath visible, and the stars seem frozen above you. But once you step inside, everything changes. The world softens. The first thing that greets you is warmth. A central hearth glows with a steady fire, smoke curling upward to the thatched roof. It does not smell like modern fireplaces. It is thicker, heavier, mixed with the scent of pine resin, wool, and the faint musk of animals resting nearby. For the Vikings, this was home, and for us, it is the beginning of a lesson in how rest used to be woven directly into daily life. As your eyes adjust to the dim glow, you notice the long, narrow shape of the hall. Wooden beams stretch across the ceiling, each one hand cut, fitted, and sealed with moss to block the winter draft. The space is not luxurious by modern standards, no polished floors, no glass windows. But there is a strength to it, a kind of security. These walls were not just shelter. They were guardians against the world, outside, and within them, the Viking family created a rhythm that carried them safely through the longest nights. Imagine taking a seat on one of the benches that line the walls. The wood is rough, worn smooth in places by years of use. Behind you, woven tapestries or animal hides hang down, not for decoration alone, but to insulate and keep the cold from creeping in. Beneath your feet, rushes or straw are scattered on the floor, sometimes mixed with herbs to freshen the air. Everything here has purpose. Nothing is wasted. And then you notice the people. This is not a household where each person disappears into a private room at night, closing a door, retreating into silence. Instead, it is a communal space. The firelight touches every face, the elder with deep-lined eyes sitting nearest the flames, children curling close to their parents, young men and women stretching out toward the darker edges of the room. Even the animals, goats, cows, chickens, have their place, sectioned off but close enough that you can hear their slow breathing. Their warmth, their presence, was part of the design. To a Viking, the quiet shuffle of hooves at night was not a disturbance. It was reassurance, a signal that life surrounded you, and you were safe. Think for a moment about how different this feels from our world. Most of us sleep alone, or perhaps with one other person. Silence is considered the goal. No noises, no interruptions. Yet for the Vikings, sound was comfort. The crackle of the fire, the rustle of hay, the murmur of a sibling whispering across the room, the low sigh of an animal shifting in the stall. These were not distractions. They were lullabies. In a world full of real dangers, complete silence might have felt eerie, even unsafe. But the familiar chorus of life all around you, that was peace. And here's something fascinating. The architecture of the longhouse itself shaped the way people rested. The hearth, was the center of both warmth and hierarchy. The closer you slept to the fire, the warmer you were, and often the more important your role in the household. Elders or respected members stayed nearest, both protected and honored. Children nestled nearby, often wrapped in layers of wool and fur, forming a circle of shared body heat. Those farther from the fire accepted the colder edges of the room, but carried with them the vigor of youth, able to endure. This was not just a sleeping arrangement. It was a living map of the family, a reminder of bonds, respect, and responsibility. Let me paint you a picture. A winter storm lashes outside, snow piling against the walls. Inside, shadows dance across the wooden beams as flames flicker and sparks rise. The longhouse glows like a heartbeat in the darkness. A grandmother hums softly, her voice blending with the wind outside. A child presses closer to their mother, eyes heavy with sleep. A dog stretches at the foot of the bedding, sighs, and rests its head. The smell of wool and smoke fills the air, and slowly the entire hall sinks into rest. There is no concept of sleep optimization here. No talk of REM cycles or sleep trackers. And yet, the conditions, the dim light, the cool air against your face, the heavy warmth of blankets, the rhythm of voices fading into silence, all align perfectly with what our bodies crave. Nature and culture work together, not against each other. Sleep was not fought for, measured, or hacked. It was simply part of living. Now, this is just the doorway to our story, because what we have described, the immersive setting of the Viking longhouse, is only the beginning. In the coming parts, we will look closer at the materials they used, the rituals that shaped their evenings, and the surprising ways cold, community, and even dreams themselves created some of the best sleep in history. But before we get there, let us hold on to this image. A longhouse in the dark, glowing with firelight, filled with life, warmth, and rest. A place where, against all odds, people discovered something we are still searching for today, the art of truly restful sleep. In the last part, we stepped inside a Viking longhouse and felt its warmth, its rhythm, and its sense of belonging. But the story of Viking sleep does not stop at the architecture or the fire. It continues in the most intimate details, the materials people used to create comfort in a world that was anything but comfortable. If you have ever thought that a good night's sleep depends on a luxury mattress or a pillow filled with memory foam, then the Vikings have something to teach us. Their beds might have looked simple. By our standards, no polished headboards, no spring coils, but the materials they relied on were perfectly adapted to their climate, their lifestyle, and their needs. In fact, the way they layered and combined those materials holds lessons that modern science is only now rediscovering. Let us start with the foundation, straw and hay. Imagine a wooden bed frame, rough but sturdy, lined with a thick layer of dried plants. This was the mattress of the Viking household. Straw provided cushioning, yes, but more importantly, it offered insulation. Air trapped between the stalks created a buffer against the cold rising from the ground. It was not glamorous, but it worked, and when the straw flattened or grew musty, it could simply be recycled back into the land as fodder or compost. In a way, these beds were among the most sustainable sleep systems in history. On top of that came the real star of Viking comfort, wool. If there was one material that defined Norse life, it was wool. Their sheep were not the fluffy cartoon animals we picture today, but hardy, weather-resistant breeds that produced coarse, thick fibers. Women in the household spent countless hours spinning and weaving that wool into cloth. The blankets they created were not delicate. They were heavy, dense, almost carpet-like. Picture laying one of these across your body. The weight pressing down, the warmth building slowly, the feeling of being securely wrapped. Today we call that a weighted blanket and pay a premium for it. The Vikings simply called it life. Now, add furs to the picture. The northern climate demanded more than wool alone could provide. Animal hides, reindeer, bear, fox, sheep, were layered over or under wool blankets. Each fur carried different qualities. Some were light and soft, others dense and rugged. A family might pool resources to ensure at least one or two quality furs were available, passing them down like heirlooms. To snuggle under a fur was more than comfort. It was protection, almost a shield against the winter. And yet, these were not static setups. Bedding was flexible, adjustable, layered, depending on the season or situation. A child running a fever might be swaddled in extra wool. A hunter returning with a fresh pelt might share it with the household, adding warmth to everyone. Even the way people positioned their blankets mattered. Some covered from chin to toe, others tucked up only to the chest, leaving hands exposed to the cool air. That slight temperature contrast, warm body, cool extremities, is exactly what modern research shows helps the body drift into deeper sleep. Let us not forget the personal touches. Archaeological finds reveal small carved wooden boxes at the foot of beds, holding combs, jewelry, or keepsakes. These were not just functional containers, they were part of the bedtime ritual. Imagine brushing out your hair with a carved comb, placing it carefully in a box, and then settling under the weight of a woolen blanket. The action told your body, the day is over, it is time to rest. Now compare this with today. We chase comfort through endless options: memory foam, hybrid mattresses, cooling gels, electric blankets. Yet many of us still wake restless, too hot, too cold, or unable to fall asleep. The Vikings, with nothing but straw, wool, and fur, built systems that naturally regulated heat, absorbed sweat, and adjusted to the body's rhythms. Their bedding was breathable, renewable, and heavy enough to calm the nervous system. Without knowing the words melatonin or deep sleep cycle, they lived in alignment with them. Here's a story that makes this point vivid. In Iceland, traditional wool blankets are still woven in some rural areas, using old techniques passed down through families. Tourists who stay in these farmhouses often remark that they sleep more deeply than anywhere else. Not because the beds are luxurious, but because the blankets weigh them down in a soothing way. The scratchy, heavy wool, combined with the cold air of the north, produces the kind of sleep modern sleep clinics try to replicate with machines and studies. It is almost ironic. The ancient way feels like the newest breakthrough. And what about hygiene? You might wonder, did not straw beds get dirty quickly? Yes, they did, but that was part of the cycle. Unlike our mattresses, which we keep for years, straw bedding was temporary. Families replaced it seasonally, sometimes more often, keeping things fresher than you would expect. Woolen furs were also cleaned, beaten, shaken out, smoked over fires to kill pests. These practices were not perfect, but they kept sleep spaces serviceable and surprisingly durable. The key takeaway here is adaptability. Viking bedding was not about perfection. It was about function. Every piece, straw, wool, fur, worked together to create a system that could evolve with need. Cold night add another fur. Warm season, strip down to lighter wool. Child sick, move them closer to the hearth and pile on the blankets. Unlike our rigid beds, Viking sleep systems bent to circumstance, and that flexibility may be one reason their rest felt so secure. Think about it. When you lie down tonight, what is really stopping you from sleep? Is it that your bed is too soft, too firm, too warm? Or is it that your environment is locked in, unchanging, fighting against your body's needs? The Vikings did not fight, they adapted. They let the materials around them, plants, animals, fibers, do the work, layering until it felt right. And as the fire in the longhouse flickered low, as the weight of wool and fur settled across tired bodies, the family could surrender. Their sleep was not perfect, but it was complete. It was enough, and maybe that is the secret we have forgotten, not chasing flawless comfort, but learning how to rest with what we have, to let nature and tradition carry us into dreams. In the last section, we explored the materials that wrapped Viking families in warmth, straw, wool, and fur, layered together into a surprisingly sophisticated sleep system. But there is one ingredient we have not yet focused on, and it might just be the most important of all: each other. For the Vikings, sleep was never just an individual experience. It was a collective act, shaped by community, family bonds, and the unspoken comfort of knowing that you were not facing the night alone. Today, many of us retreat into our own private rooms, closing doors, turning on sound machines, and trying to drown out the world. But in the Viking longhouse, the sounds of life were woven directly into the fabric of sleep. Imagine lying down at the end of a long day of farm work, sailing or weaving. The fire glows low, blankets are pulled up, and you are not alone in your bed or even your room. To your left, your brother is rolling over with a sigh. To your right, your younger sister whispers a last-minute question to your mother. Across the room, your grandfather clears his throat before settling again. Nearby, a dog shifts and lays its head on someone's leg. And just beyond the partition, you can hear the gentle breath of livestock, the occasional snort or shuffle of hooves. Instead of silence, the Vikings slept inside a lullaby of living sounds. To us, these might feel like disturbances, but to them they were reassurance. Every rustle meant safety, people were nearby, animals were calm, the fire was still burning. Silence, in contrast, could mean danger, predators, illness, or an empty hall. For the Viking mind, noise was not a problem. It was proof of life. There is also a warmth here that went beyond temperature. We often hear the term body heat used in survival stories, but in the longhouse it was a nightly reality. Families curled together under shared blankets, creating rings of warmth. Elders stayed closest to the hearth, children tucked in between parents, young adults and stronger members further out at the colder edges. The result was like a living organism, each member helping regulate the comfort of the group. This was not only about physical survival, it was about belonging. Sleeping in proximity built trust, reinforced bonds, and made every person feel like part of something larger. Think about how children today sleep more peacefully beside a parent, or how pets often curl up near their humans. The Vikings extended that principle across entire households. Real-life research actually backs this up. Anthropologists studying communal sleeping in various cultures, whether in nomadic groups, rural villages, or extended families, find that people often report feeling more secure and falling asleep faster when surrounded by others. The sounds of breathing, the rhythm of shifting bodies, even the warmth of a nearby companion, all send signals to the nervous system that it is safe to rest. The Vikings lived inside that safety net every night, But what about privacy? Surely not everyone wanted to be surrounded all the time. That is true. Yet the Viking longhouse was not a free-for-all. There were subtle rules and customs. Elders earned the warmer, central spots by the fire. Married couples sometimes shared bedding, wrapped under heavy furs. Children usually clustered near their parents, learning through closeness. And although there were no separate bedrooms, personal space could still be marked by small belongings: a carved box at the bed's foot, a cloak folded carefully, or even a fur that clearly belonged to one person. These touches allowed individuality to exist inside the collective. Flexibility was another key. If someone was ill, their place could shift. A sick child would be moved closer to the fire. An elder struggling with pain might be granted extra furs. If a mother had a newborn, the entire arrangement of the sleeping circle might change for weeks or months. The longhouse was not rigid. It adapted like a living family organism. Now picture this scene: a cold winter night, snow pressing against the walls. The fire throws up gentle shadows on the beams. A father finishes telling a story about Thor or Odin, his voice carrying softly through the room. A child giggles, then grows quiet. Someone tucks a blanket over the shoulders of a sibling already half asleep. A grandmother hums an old tune, low and steady. The dog lifts its head at the sound, then sighs and relaxes again. Slowly the room fades into drowsy silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of shared rest. For us today, this may sound both strange and comforting. Strange because we are so accustomed to valuing independence. Our own beds, our own rooms, our own sleep space. Comforting because deep down, many of us remember that sleep is easier when we are not alone. Babies sleep better when held. Couples often rest more soundly together. Pets choose to curl against us for a reason. The Vikings simply embraced what we still instinctively know, that rest is not just physical, it is emotional, communal, relational. And here's a powerful insight. The Viking longhouse turned sleep into a ritual of connection every night. People did not just collapse from exhaustion. They gathered, they shared warmth, they listened to the same fire, the same stories, the same world. Rest became another form of community. What can we learn from that today? Maybe we can't all live in one room with our extended families, but we can reintroduce a sense of connection into our nights. That might mean letting pets share the bed, creating evening rituals with loved ones, or even using soft music, recordings of gentle conversation, or natural noises to remind us we are not isolated. Because one of the greatest enemies of modern sleep is not light or noise, it is loneliness. The Vikings, for all their hardships, solved that problem simply by sleeping together. So as we continue our journey into the world of Viking rest, remember this: comfort was not only measured in blankets or firelight. It was measured in closeness, the touch of a hand, the murmur of a story, the steady rhythm of another's breathing nearby. In the end, what kept the cold away was not just wool or straw, it was the warmth of human connection, wrapping every member of the household in a blanket that no winter storm could break. In the last part, we saw how Viking families turned sleep into a communal act, sharing warmth, sound, and presence inside the longhouse. But there is another dimension to their rest that we need to explore, and it is something modern life has almost completely erased: the way they lived in rhythm with nature. For the Vikings, time was not measured by glowing numbers on a digital clock or buzzing alarms. Instead, their entire sense of rhythm, when to work, when to eat, when to rest, was guided by the natural world, the rising and setting of the sun, The lengthening and shortening of days, the chill in the air, the growth of crops, and the cycles of animals. Life was a dance with the seasons, and sleep followed the same choreography. Imagine winter in Scandinavia. Nights stretch for 18, sometimes 20 hours. Darkness is not an inconvenience. It is an environment. In those long, cold months, people did not force themselves to stay active with artificial light. Instead, they leaned into the rhythm. Work was slower, food was simpler, and rest was longer. People napped more, slept in cycles, and gave themselves permission to sink into the deep quiet of the season. This was not laziness, it was strategy. By conserving energy, they survived the harshest months. Now, flip the calendar to summer. Suddenly the nights are short, sometimes just a few hours of dim twilight. Crops need tending, ships must sail, animals must be cared for. In this season, the longhouse was alive with movement well into the evening. People slept less, but the sleep they did have was still restorative because it was in tune with the environment. They did not fight the light. They flowed with it. Their bodies adjusted naturally to the sun's generosity. Think of how different this is from our world. We try to flatten time into sameness, wake at 7, bed at 11, every day, every season. Artificial light allows us to ignore winter darkness and summer brightness, but our bodies know the truth. That is why many people feel sluggish in January and restless in July. We have severed the connection between our inner rhythms and the world outside. The Vikings, by contrast, embraced it. Evenings in the longhouse were not a sudden cut from day to night. They were gradual. Work slowed as the sun dipped. Animals were fed and settled. Fires were stoked. Herbs thrown into the flames for aroma. People gathered around the hearth, telling stories, weaving, repairing tools. The light dimmed slowly. Shadows lengthened. Voices softened. This natural transition eased the body into readiness for rest. Compare that with our modern experience: bright screens until midnight, then an abrupt attempt to shut everything off. No wonder our brains resist. There is also something profound about how the Vikings viewed the in-between. When they woke in the middle of the night, a natural phenomenon known as segmented sleep, they did not panic or check a clock. They accepted it. People might get up, add a log to the fire, whisper a story, drink a cup of warm milk, or simply sit in silence before drifting back down. The boundary between waking and sleeping was not rigid, it was porous. Modern sleep researchers have found that segmented sleep was common in many pre-industrial societies. The first sleep lasted a few hours after dusk, then came a period of quiet wakefulness, then a second sleep until dawn. People used that midnight interval for prayer, intimacy, reflection, or simple companionship. The Vikings, without naming it, lived this way too. Instead of seeing wakefulness as a problem, they saw it as part of the rhythm. Let us add some imagery. Picture a Viking household deep in winter. Outside, the world is black and frozen. Inside, a few people stir in the middle of the night. The fire glows red, throwing slow shadows. Someone adds wood. Sparks floating into the smoke. A mother sips from a clay cup, warm liquid steaming. A grandfather leans forward, telling a whispered story about a mountain spirit. Children half awake listen with wide eyes before drifting back under their blankets. No one is anxious about the hour. The long night has room for both dreams and waking. This approach also shaped their health. By slowing down in winter and conserving energy, They avoided exhausting themselves when food was scarcer. By rising early and working late in summer, they made the most of abundance. The body was never fighting against nature, it was moving with it. And science today tells us that aligning with circadian rhythms, darkness for melatonin release, light for wakefulness is critical for long-term health. The Vikings did not need a lab to prove it. They simply lived it. Another key detail, firelight itself. Unlike the blue-white glare of phones and bulbs, fire produces warm, flickering light that does not suppress melatonin. Watching flames, eyes half closed, naturally triggers relaxation. No wonder children fell asleep listening to stories in its glow. Modern people spend hundreds of dollars on sunset lamps and sleep lights to mimic what a Viking household had for free. And then there is the soundscape. The rhythm of the evening was not just visual, it was auditory. Crackling fire, hushed voices, animals breathing, occasional gusts of wind against the walls. These sounds did not jar the mind. They grounded it. Today, many of us seek white noise machines to create that sense of continuity. The Vikings had the real thing, the natural orchestra of life. What can we take from this? The lesson is not that we should give up electricity and live by candlelight, though that might be an interesting experiment. The lesson is to respect the cues our bodies still respond to. Dim the lights earlier. Allow seasonal shifts in sleep length without guilt. Accept midnight wakefulness instead of fearing it. Create evening rituals that ease you toward rest instead of jolting you into it. In short, live a little more like the Vikings, aligned, not resisting. So as we move deeper into this journey, hold on to this thought. The Vikings did not master sleep because they controlled it. They mastered it because they surrendered to rhythms larger than themselves. Sun, moon, fire, season all guided them, and when they lay down each night, wrapped in wool and surrounded by family, they were not fighting against the world. They were flowing with it. That flow may be the greatest secret of all. In the last section, we explored how Viking sleep followed the rhythms of nature's sun, moon, firelight, and season shaping the body's rest. But before the Vikings surrendered to sleep, there was another important piece of the puzzle, the winding down ritual. Nights in the longhouse were not just about collapsing after a day of hard labor. They were about slowing down together, preparing mind and body for rest in ways both practical and deeply human. Let us picture the scene. The sun has dipped low, and the longhouse is settling into evening. The day's work, feeding animals, chopping wood, weaving cloth, repairing tools, has been completed. A simple meal has been eaten, perhaps fish with bread, or porridge flavored with herbs. The bowls have been stacked, the fire stirred, and the first shadows have begun to stretch across the wooden walls. But instead of silence, the room comes alive with gentle conversation. This was the Viking prime time, not filled with screens or entertainment devices, but with voices, stories, songs, and laughter. Imagine elders seated close to the hearth, their lined faces glowing orange as they recite sagas of gods and heroes. Children lean against their parents, wide-eyed, half listening, half drifting towards sleep. Young men and women, tired but restless, might carve small wooden figures or mend clothing, their hands busy while their ears drink in the tales. Firelight plays a central role here. The flames flicker and dance, casting moving shadows that transform the room into something dreamlike. A child might see a dragon's wing in the smoke, or a mountain giant's face in the shadows. Adults, too, felt the hypnotic effect. Watching flames is a universal signal for the body to slow down. The glow is warm but not harsh, the perfect cue for melatonin to rise. Long before scientists proved it, the Vikings intuitively created the ideal environment for sleep preparation. And then there were the stories. Norse sagas were not just entertainment, they were vessels of memory, tradition, and identity. By telling them in the evening, families tied the act of rest to the act of belonging. To hear of Thor's thunder or Odin's wisdom was to be reminded that you were part of something bigger than your chores or your worries. These stories placed individuals inside a cosmic order. When your mind drifts into that sense of connection, sleep comes not as escape, but as continuation. But not every evening was epic. Sometimes it was as simple as quiet conversation. A father whispering plans for the next day. A mother humming a lullaby. A sibling sharing a funny moment that happened in the fields. These small exchanges, repeated night after night, became rituals of reassurance. They told the nervous system it is safe, you are surrounded, you can let go. Think about how this compares to modern evenings. How often do we try to rush straight from stimulation into bed? We scroll through phones, reply to messages, binge-watch shows, then expect our brains to shut down instantly. The Vikings remind us of something we have forgotten. Sleep is a journey, not a switch. Their evenings stretched like a gentle slope, leading from action into stillness. The ritual itself was as important as the rest that followed. Let us add another layer. Sound. The longhouse was not quiet in the modern sense, but the sounds were consistent and soothing. Crackling fire, murmurs of conversation, occasional laughter, the shuffle of animals settling into straw. These formed a kind of natural white noise. Unlike the jarring sounds of cars, sirens, or electronic devices, these were organic, rhythmic, predictable. The brain, instead of being startled, felt cradled. Music also played a role. Vikings had simple instruments, lyres, flutes, horns. On special nights, songs might rise with the firelight. Some were lively, but many were soft, repetitive, hypnotic. Imagine lying under heavy wool blankets, listening to a gentle melody while flames cast shadows on the ceiling. The line between waking and dreaming blurs. One of the most touching parts of these rituals was the physical gestures of care. A mother pulling a blanket over a child's shoulder, a friend handing someone a carved cup of warm drink, a dog nudging closer to its human companion. These small acts created a nightly rhythm of affection. Sleep was not just functional, it was relational. Anthropologists studying communal societies today note that winding down rituals are crucial for group survival. They are not simply about rest, they reinforce trust. By gathering together in low light, telling stories, and sharing warmth, communities strengthen bonds. When people feel connected, they sleep more deeply. The Vikings, knowingly or not, built that into their nights. Here's a story to make this vivid. Imagine a boy of 10, tired after helping in the fields all day. His hands are sore, his eyes heavy, but he does not crawl straight into blankets. Instead, he sits cross-legged by the fire, listening as his grandfather tells of a mountain that once swallowed goats whole. The boy's mind fills with images of towering peaks and wandering animals. His sister laughs quietly at the tale. His mother places a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Slowly, the story fades into silence. His body surrenders, and by the time the embers glow red, he is already asleep, curled against his family. Now compare that to a modern child, lit by the cold glow of a tablet at midnight, trying to fall asleep alone in silence. Which do you think drifts more easily into rest, which feels more deeply rooted, more protected. The Viking winding down ritual offers us a practical lesson. Create transition, whether it is turning off bright lights, telling stories, playing soft music, or simply talking with loved ones. We need space between day and night. Our bodies crave cues, and when we provide them, sleep arrives more gently. So as we close this chapter, remember, the Vikings may have lived in a world far harsher than ours, but they found ways to make evenings tender. Stories by fire, laughter among family, the touch of a hand, the hum of animals, all weaving together into a nightly ritual. For them, bedtime was not an end, but a continuation of life, rich with memory and connection. And perhaps that is why, even in the midst of storms and scarcity, their sleep carried a depth we still envy today. In the last section, we saw how Viking evenings unfolded like a ritual. Stories, laughter, soft voices, and the gentle glow of fire carrying everyone toward rest. But there is another part of the Viking sleep story that might surprise you. It was not just the warmth of wool or the closeness of family that made their nights restorative. It was also the cold. That is right, the very thing we often try to escape in modern bedrooms was, for the Vikings, a natural ally. And in many ways, the chill of a Nordic night actually improved the quality of their sleep. Think about what it means to fall asleep today. Many of us crank up heaters in winter or air conditioners in summer, trying to make the room perfectly comfortable. But research shows that our bodies actually prefer a cooler environment when it is time to rest. Core body temperature needs to drop slightly in order for deep sleep to begin. Too much warmth can trap us in lighter stages of sleep, causing tossing and turning. The Vikings did not have thermostats, but they did not need them. Their world was already perfectly tuned for cool nights. Picture the longhouse on a winter evening. The hearth burns at the center, glowing and steady, but it does not flood the entire hall with heat. Step a little farther from the fire and the air becomes crisp. The edges of the room hold a subtle chill, the kind that makes you pull your blanket tighter. When you shift beneath heavy wool or fur, your nose catches the sharp freshness of cold air, while your body stays cocooned in warmth. That contrast, cool face, warm core is exactly the condition modern sleep experts recommend. The Vikings may not have known the word thermoregulation, but they lived it every night. Their bodies, wrapped in layers yet kissed by cool air, found the balance that invites deep, restorative rest. And the benefits did not stop there. Cold environments reduced the spread of bacteria and parasites inside the longhouse. In an age without antibiotics, this mattered. Sleeping in cooler air lowered inflammation, soothed sore muscles, and helped people recover from long days of physical labor. The Vikings could not have explained the science, but they would have noticed the results. Deeper rest, quicker healing, fewer illnesses spreading during winter. Here's a vivid example. Imagine a young farmer returning from the fields, shoulders aching after hours of threshing grain. He stretches out under a fur blanket, firelight glowing on the beams. His breath is visible in the cold air, but his body is warm under the layers. Within minutes, muscles relax, soreness fades, and sleep pulls him down. That is not just comfort, it is recovery. The cold air acts like nature's ice pack, calming inflammation without the farmer even realizing it. Of course, this system was not flawless. On the harshest nights, cold could be dangerous, especially for the elderly or infants. That is why sleeping positions, mattered so much. Vulnerable family members were always moved closer to the hearth, shielded by layers of blankets and surrounded by others. Body heat. The strong and healthy took the colder edges, protecting the core of the family circle. In this way, the cold was not just endured, it was managed, distributed, even respected. Contrast this with modern habits. Many of us sleep in rooms that are too warm, sealed tightly against fresh air, filled with artificial heat. The result? Restlessness, sweating, shallow sleep. When we do wake, we often blame stress or bad dreams, but the real culprit might be something as simple as temperature. The Vikings, for all their hardships, accidentally discovered what modern science confirms: cooler nights lead to healthier sleep. And the sensory experience of cold carried psychological effects too. Step outside a Viking longhouse at night, and the air would shock your lungs sharp, clean, bracing. Coming back inside, you would appreciate the warmth all the more. Even within the hall, the subtle chill in the air made the fire feel alive, protective, central. That cycle of contrast, cold outside, warmth inside, created gratitude and groundedness. It reminded people of both their fragility and their resilience. Another detail worth noting: ventilation. Longhouses were smoky, yes, but they were not airtight. Gaps in the roof, spaces between timbers, and deliberate openings let air circulate. That meant fresh, cold oxygen flowed through the hall, even as the fire warmed the space. Compare that to our sealed bedrooms, where stale air builds up overnight. The Vikings may have coughed on smoke, but they also breathed fresher air than many of us do in climate-controlled rooms. Cold also shaped the rhythm of the seasons. In winter, long nights and freezing temperatures encouraged longer periods of rest. People slowed down, ate less, and slept more, conserving strength. In summer, shorter, milder nights meant less sleep, but still good quality, because the air was cool and invigorating. Sleep was never a battle against the environment. It was a partnership with it. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this beautifully. Imagine a sailor on a longship, wrapped in a cloak, lying down on deck under the stars. The North Sea wind is biting, but he tucks closer to his companions, sharing body heat. His face is cold, his hands stiff, but under the layers he is warm. Waves rock the ship. The night sky is clear, and despite the chill, his body relaxes into slumber. It is not luxury, it is survival sleep. Yet that survival sleep, born of cold air and closeness, is deep, grounding, and restorative. So what lessons can we take for our own lives? We might not want to crack open the windows in the middle of winter or invite goats into our bedrooms, but we can learn to embrace cooler sleeping conditions. Lower the thermostat at night. Use natural layers instead of heavy synthetic comforters. Allow your face or hands to stay slightly cool while your body remains warm. And if you wake in the middle of the night feeling restless, consider adjusting temperature before blaming stress. The Vikings did not hack their sleep with gadgets. They simply lived in conditions that modern science is now trying to replicate in labs: cooler environments, breathable bedding, balanced contrasts. Their secret was not comfort in the modern sense. It was alignment with the cold. So as we close this chapter, picture it again: a long house on a winter night, fire glowing, smoke drifting upward, wool blankets heavy, furs pulled tight, breath visible in the air, a soft chill on the skin, a deep warmth underneath. That mixture of cold and heat, challenge and safety, made Viking sleep not just possible, but powerful. And maybe, just maybe, it is a lesson worth carrying back into our own bedrooms today. In the last section, we discovered how the cold itself was part of Viking rest, a silent ally that made sleep deeper, healthier, and more restorative. But cold was not the only element shaping their nights. The Vikings also lived under a blanket of darkness, far richer and longer than most of us can imagine today. And that darkness, instead of frightening them, became a gift. Let us begin with winter in Scandinavia. Imagine standing outside a Viking longhouse in January. The sun has disappeared early in the afternoon, and the world has plunged into a darkness that will last for 18, maybe even 20 hours. No electric street lamps. No glowing billboards. No blue light from screens. Only the soft silver of the moon, the scatter of stars, and the glow of firelight leaking through the cracks of the hall. Inside, the longhouse reflects this rhythm. The fire burns low, casting deep shadows that move and shift across the beams. Shadows become characters of their own, giants, animals, twisting branches. Children might watch these shapes until their eyes droop, lulled into dreams by the flicker. Adults, too, find their minds drifting as the darkness seeps deeper into the space. The long night does not press down like a burden. It wraps around like a blanket. Modern science tells us that darkness is essential for sleep. It triggers the release of melatonin, the hormone that signals to the body that it is time to rest. But in our modern world, we fight darkness constantly. City lights, car headlights, phones glowing by the bed. We treat darkness as an enemy to be banished. The Vikings embraced it. Their entire environment worked with their biology rather than against it. There is also something psychological here. For the Vikings, the long night was not empty. It was filled with firelight, stories, laughter, whispers, and silence that was not lonely but communal. In darkness, people leaned closer to one another. Shadows made the world mysterious, yes, but also intimate. Think of how you feel during a power outage today. The lights go out, candles are lit, and suddenly conversations deepen, laughter feels louder, and even silence feels shared. That was every winter night for the Vikings. Another fascinating detail is how darkness shaped their sense of time. Without clocks, the line between evening, midnight, and morning blurred. You might wake in the middle of the night and not know or care if it was 2 or 4. The fire's embers told you more than the sky. If you stirred, you might add wood, whisper to a neighbor, or simply lie back and watch the glow. There was no pressure to get back to sleep. The night was long enough to hold waking and sleeping together. This relaxed relationship with darkness might explain why dreams were so central in Norse culture. When you spend hours in dim light, half asleep, half awake, your mind has room to wander. You accept blurred boundaries between reality and imagination. Dreams become part of the nightly conversation, not just fleeting images to be dismissed. A child could dream of a mountain spirit, tell the story at breakfast, and the family might nod thoughtfully, weaving it into their worldview. Darkness was not just physical. It was a doorway. Think about how this compares to us. Many people today fear darkness. We flood bedrooms with night lights, keep TVs on, or scroll phones until our eyes close. But what if darkness is not something to fear? What if it is a signal, a medicine, a portal to deeper rest? The Vikings lived with that belief instinctively. Darkness was not absence, it was presence. Let me paint a scene. A Viking household in midwinter, deep in the long night. Outside, snow buries the fields. Wolves howl faintly in the distance, but the walls hold strong. Inside, the fire glows low, almost out, embers pulsing like a heartbeat. People sleep in clusters, but some stir. A father leans up, pokes at the fire, and sparks rise. A child murmurs in her sleep. A mother hums quietly to soothe her. Shadows ripple across the walls, and for a moment the room feels like it exists outside of time. Then silence deepens again, and the night holds everyone safely until dawn finally returns hours later. The long nights also taught patience. Without artificial light, tasks had to wait. There was no rushing into fields at midnight, no urgent need to extend the day. Darkness enforced rest, reflection, even stillness. In that enforced pause, families connected more deeply, stories flourished, and bodies repaired themselves. Today, when many of us feel pressured to always do more, the Viking long night reminds us of the power of doing less. Of course, darkness was not always easy. It could be unsettling, especially for children or during storms. But even then, the Vikings transformed fear into ritual. A story told, a blanket pulled tighter, a song sung softly. In this way, the long night became less about terror and more about togetherness. The shadows that frightened could also fascinate. The silence that threatened could also soothe. What can we learn from this? That sleep is not just about the right mattress or the perfect schedule. It is about atmosphere. Dim the lights earlier. Let the room grow dark, not just at bedtime, but in the hours before. Use warm, flickering light if possible, candles, fireplaces, or lamps designed to mimic firelight. And do not fear waking in the night. See it as part of the rhythm, a natural pause in a long stretch of rest. So, as we close this chapter, imagine lying in a Viking longhouse under heavy wool blankets. The room is nearly dark, only the faint red of the hearth still glowing. Shadows ripple across the beams. Beside you, someone's breathing, steady, slow. Outside, the winter night stretches endlessly, holding the world in silence, and you feel it, not emptiness, but fullness, not fear, but peace. The long night becomes your ally, carrying you deeper into dreams than you have gone in years. In the last part, we explored the darkness of Viking nights, the endless winters, where shadows became companions, and silence wrapped around entire families. But in that darkness, something even more mysterious stirred: dreams. For the Vikings, dreams were not just random images. They were messages, guides, even warnings from realms beyond the visible. Imagine drifting off in a longhouse. Firelight flickers on the beams above you, your body heavy under wool blankets, your mind easing into slumber. Soon the boundary between waking and sleeping begins to blur. Shadows turn into shapes. A story told by an elder earlier in the evening morphs into visions in your mind. You see a mountain, vast and alive, or a ship sailing across a sea of stars. To you, these might feel like ordinary dreams, but to a Viking, such visions could carry meaning. In Norse sagas and poetry, dreams often mark turning points. A king dreams of his own death. A warrior sees a battle before it happens. A woman envisions journeys her children will one day take. These were not dismissed as imagination. They were taken seriously. Dreams could foretell the future, reveal hidden dangers, or carry wisdom from the gods. A single dream might change the course of decisions, influence voyages, or alter alliances. This worldview came from a culture where the line between physical and spiritual was never sharply drawn. Sleep itself was seen as a crossing point. While the body rested, the spirit could wander, travel, or encounter forces unseen. To dream was to step into another layer of reality, one that demanded respect. Think of how different this is from modern life. Today, many of us dismiss dreams as random brain activity. Maybe we laugh about a strange dream over breakfast, but rarely do we treat it as meaningful. For the Vikings, the dream world was another arena of life, just as important as the waking one. By honoring dreams, they gave sleep a spiritual depth that most of us overlook. Consider this: when children dreamed, their parents might listen carefully, wondering if the vision carried a hidden truth. If an elder spoke of a dream, others paid attention. Dreams were not private, they were shared. This made them part of the community's wisdom, not just an individual's experience. Let me give you an example. Picture a Viking sailor preparing to leave on a long voyage. The night before departure, he dreams of a ship caught in a storm. Waves crash, sails tear, men cry out. He wakes, shaken. In modern times, he might brush it off as anxiety. But in a Viking household, this dream would be discussed. Perhaps the voyage is delayed. Perhaps offerings are made to the gods for protection. The dream is not wasted. It shapes reality. And dreams were not only warnings, they could inspire courage or creativity. A farmer might dream of fertile fields and take it as encouragement to sow early. A young warrior might dream of victory and march into battle with greater confidence. Even stories themselves, told at night by the fire, blended with dreams until no one could tell where memory ended and imagination began. Modern science gives us a curious confirmation. We know now that REM sleep, the stage of vivid dreaming, plays a crucial role in memory, problem-solving, and emotional balance. The Vikings did not have sleep labs, but their cultural respect for dreams may have helped them psychologically. By giving dreams weight, they gave their minds permission to process, release, and reframe daily struggles. What we call therapy dreams today, they called visions. There is also the element of spirituality. Norse belief included a layered universe: Asgard, Midgard, Hell, and other realms. Dreams might be seen as journeys into those spaces. The dead could appear with messages. Gods could whisper guidance. Myths and sleep were not separate. They fed each other. Imagine the sense of awe and humility this created. To fall asleep was not just rest. It was to step into a space where gods and ancestors might speak. Of course, not every dream was treated equally. Some were dismissed as nonsense, just as we do today. But when a dream felt vivid, strange, or insistent, people listened. That openness meant the Vikings lived in a world where the boundary between seen and unseen was thinner. And perhaps that gave their nights a richness we rarely experience. Here's a story to bring it to life. A child in a longhouse dreams of a giant tree stretching across the sky. The next morning he tells his mother, who recalls tales of Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting all realms. The family gathers, and the grandfather nods, saying this dream is a reminder that they are part of a greater web of life. The child feels not just entertained, but valued. His dream has meaning, his voice has weight. That sense of significance becomes part of his identity. Now compare that with a modern child who dreams of something vivid but is told, it is just a dream. The difference is not about truth or falsehood. It is about respect. The Vikings respected the dream world, and that respect gave their nights depth. So what can we learn from this? First, do not rush past your dreams. Even if you do not believe they carry prophecy, they hold clues about your emotions, your fears, your hopes. Keep a journal. Share them with someone you trust. Treat them as windows, not waste. Second, remember that sleep is not just physical repair. It is mental and spiritual exploration. Give yourself permission to drift into that mystery. Dim the lights. Let the mind wander, and allow dreams to be part of your nightly journey. For the Vikings, dreams were not escapes. They were encounters. Each night, wrapped in furs and shadows, they entered a space where gods whispered, ancestors appeared, and futures unfolded. To them, the dream was as real as the firelight, and when they woke, they carried those visions into their lives, weaving them into decisions, stories, and traditions. So as you settle into your own bed tonight, think of this. The Vikings did not just rest in sleep. They traveled, they listened, they dreamed, and in those dreams they found meaning that carried them through even the harshest of days. In the last section, we explored how the Vikings treated dreams not as illusions, but as messages, bridges between the human world and the unseen. But while the dream world carried deep meaning, the waking arrangements of sleep were just as thoughtful. The longhouse was not a place of rigid rules and fixed routines. It was a living, breathing environment where sleeping arrangements shifted with the needs of the family, the season, and the circumstances of survival. Let us step inside again. The hearth glows faintly, smoke curling to the roof. Around it, bodies lie in a pattern that seems orderly but is never permanent. Elders are closest to the fire, both because they need warmth and because their experience grants them respect. Parents and young children curl nearby, ensuring safety and comfort. Stronger adults and older children stretch out further toward the walls, where drafts creep in and blankets grow colder. But if you look closer, you will see this arrangement is not fixed in stone. It bends and flexes with the shifting needs of the household. Imagine a harsh winter storm sweeping across the fjords. Temperatures plunge lower than usual. Winds rattle the timbers. Snow pushes against the walls. On nights like this, even the strongest members might inch closer to the hearth. A teenager who usually sleeps by the outer wall now curls near siblings, layering warmth. A mother with a newborn moves closer to the fire, no matter who typically sleeps there. Flexibility was survival. The arrangement of sleep was not about pride or status. When danger pressed in, it was about keeping every member alive. Or consider illness. A child develops a fever. In modern homes, we might place the sick in a separate room to avoid spreading disease, but for the Vikings, warmth and care mattered more. The child would be brought near the hearth, surrounded by family members who checked on them through the night. A father might wake to add logs to the fire. A sibling might place a cool cloth on the child's forehead. Sleep space became care space. Illness was not faced alone. It was held inside the circle. This adaptability extended to relationships too. Married couples often shared bedding, but not always. If one partner needed more warmth or more space, adjustments were made. Parents might share their spot with a toddler who could not settle, or swap places entirely if another family member needed extra comfort. These shifts were not seen as disruptions. They were simply part of the nightly rhythm. Let us not forget the animals. Livestock usually stayed in a separate section, but in extreme cold, goats or sheep might be brought closer, their body heat adding to the warmth of the household. Dogs and cats roamed freely, often choosing their own spots among the sleepers. A dog might curl at someone's feet one night, and beside another person the next. A cat might tuck into a pile of furs or squeeze between shoulders. These animals were not just companions. They were active participants in the household's flexible ecosystem of warmth and safety. Now, compare this with our world. Most of us have fixed sleeping setups, one person, one bed, one side. Our bedrooms are private, structured, and often unchanging. This rigidity can make us feel safe, but it can also limit us. Think about how difficult it is for many people to sleep when traveling, or when their usual bed is not available. The Vikings did not have that problem. Their adaptability meant they could rest almost anywhere on straw, on ships, near a fire, even outside under the stars. Sleep was not fragile. It was resilient. Here's a vivid story. Picture a summer evening after a long day in the fields. The air is warmer, the longhouse filled with the smell of fresh hay. People are restless in the heat, so they change the arrangement. Some roll their bedding closer to open wall slats for a breath of cool air. Others move outside, laying under the twilight sky. Children fall asleep listening to the buzz of insects instead of the crackle of fire. By morning, everyone has shifted again, returning indoors or closer to the hearth. Nothing is rigid. Everything flows with the season. Modern science supports this kind of flexibility. Sleep studies show that being able to nap in different environments or adjust sleeping positions depending on comfort improves resilience and reduces stress. By constantly adapting, the Vikings trained their bodies to rest in a variety of conditions. This made them better sailors, farmers, and travelers. When you can fall asleep in a longship rocked by waves, or on a fur beside a smoky fire, you can sleep anywhere. Flexibility also had emotional effects. It taught the family that roles could shift, and support could be shared. A child might spend one night near their grandmother, listening to her stories and receiving her warmth. Another night, the same child might curl beside their parents. This fluidity built bonds across generations, weaving trust into the nightly ritual. Everyone belonged everywhere. What can we learn from this? Perhaps that we should not cling so tightly to rigid expectations of perfect sleep. If you wake in the night and need to shift, allow yourself to move. If you are restless, try another room, another blanket, another arrangement. If you are caring for someone, do not fear adjusting your own rest to meet their needs. Sleep does not have to be solitary and inflexible. It can be communal, adaptable, human. So as the fire burns low and the Vikings curl together under furs, remember this. Their strength was not just in their swords or ships. It was in their ability to adapt, to bend, to change, to make space for one another. And that adaptability, carried into the quiet hours of the night, may have been one of their greatest survival tools. The longhouse was not a static design. It was a living organism. Each night, its heartbeat shifted as people moved, adjusted, and cared for each other. That is the secret of Viking rest. Not just warmth, not just darkness, not just dreams, but the flexibility to let sleep be what it needed to be for everyone. In the last section, we explored how flexible sleeping arrangements made Viking rest resilient, always adapting to season, sickness, and family needs. But all of this would have been impossible without the very structure that held them together, the architecture of the Viking longhouse. To understand Viking sleep, we must understand the walls, beams, and roofs that embraced it. At first glance, a longhouse looks simple. A rectangular structure of wood, sometimes stone at the base, stretching perhaps 20 to 30 meters in length. The roof is steep and thatched, designed to shed heavy snow. The walls are thick, built of timber planks or wattle and daub, with moss and clay packed into every seam. But hidden within this rustic design is a genius that shaped how people lived and slept. The first genius element was insulation. In a land of brutal winters, keeping out drafts was life or death. The Vikings stuffed moss between timbers, sealed gaps with clay, and lined walls with hides or woven tapestries. These were not decorative luxuries, they were thermal armor. Every layer trapped heat, turning the longhouse into a protective shell against the howling wind. Imagine lying under a fur blanket, hearing the storm rage outside, yet feeling the stillness of the walls holding strong. That security alone could lull the body into deeper rest. Then there was the hearth, the beating heart of the home. Placed at the center of the hall, it provided light, warmth, and a constant anchor for life. Heat radiated outward, creating zones of comfort. Closest to the fire, warmth was steady and soothing. Farther out, the air cooled, drafts crept in, and stronger members of the household endured the chill. This natural gradient created a sleeping map, elders and vulnerable at the center, the resilient at the edges. The hearth was not just a fireplace. It was an organizing principle for survival. Another key feature was the roof. High, steep, and smoky, it was more than shelter. The slope allowed smoke to rise and escape through vents, while still keeping enough inside to deter insects and preserve meat hung in the rafters. For sleep this mattered. Smoke created a hazy filter that softened air, muffled sound, and sometimes even lulled people like incense. Too much could sting the eyes, but the balance created a cocoon-like atmosphere, dim and womb-like, perfect for drifting into dreams. The sound insulation of the longhouse was also remarkable. Thick logs and thatched roofs absorbed noise. Outside, the world could roar wind, storms, predators, but inside, the sounds softened. What filtered through was a steady hum, the sigh of wind against timber, the crackle of fire, the shuffle of animals. For the human nervous system, this was grounding. Noise became rhythm, not threat. Compare that with our thin-walled apartments today, where traffic, alarms, and neighbors jolt us awake. The Vikings, ironically, may have enjoyed more peaceful nights than city dwellers now. Let us not forget the animals' role in architecture. Many longhouses had stalls built into one end of the hall, where cattle, goats, or horses slept. This was not untidiness, it was design. The animals' body heat radiated into the home, boosting warmth. Their breathing created background noise that signaled safety. A Viking child might fall asleep listening to the low snort of a cow or the rustle of a goat in straw. To modern ears, this might sound disruptive, but to them it was reassurance. Silence was suspicious. Sound meant life. There is also the communal scale. Longhouses were not just for nuclear families. Some housed extended kin, servants, or even neighbors during harsh seasons. The architecture allowed for groups to cluster, yet still created subtle separations. The hearth for elders, side benches for younger members, stalls for animals. Privacy did not mean walls. It meant distance within the shared hall. This design ensured that no one was ever isolated, but everyone had a place. Now, compare this with our bedrooms today. We design for solitude, individual rooms, closed doors, artificial heat, soundproof windows. Yet many of us still struggle to sleep. The Vikings, with rougher tools, built environments that worked with their biology, insulation without suffocation, sound without chaos, community without claustrophobia. Their homes were not perfect, but they were aligned with human needs in ways we often miss. Let us imagine a night. Inside, snow falls heavily outside, the wind whipping across frozen fields. Inside, the thick walls hold. The fire glows at the center, embers pulsing. Elders sleep closest, wrapped in heavy wool. Parents curl nearby with children tucked close. Dogs lie at feet. Cats purr in furs. Cows shift in their stalls. Smoke rises slowly, carrying sparks to the rafters. Shadows ripple across beams, creating dreamlike patterns. And through it all, the house breathes, timber creaking, thatch rustling, fire crackling. It is not silent, but it is safe. And in that safety, sleep comes easily. Archaeologists studying Viking longhouses have marveled at their durability. Some stood for generations, rebuilt and expanded as families grew. The architecture was not static. It evolved. As new materials became available, as climates shifted, as needs changed, longhouses adapted. Just like the sleeping arrangements inside them, the structures themselves were flexible, resilient, alive. So what can we learn from this today? That the architecture of rest matters. A bedroom is not just a box to hold a bed. It is an environment that either supports or sabotages sleep. The Vikings remind us to pay attention to walls, light, sound, airflow, and insulation. A room that breathes, that dims naturally, that muffles harsh noise, but allows gentle sounds, that is a room designed for rest. We may not build longhouses today, but we can borrow their wisdom, hang heavier curtains to block drafts and soften sound, use natural materials that breathe, keep a steady source of warmth, but let the air remain cool. Embrace sounds that comfort pets, soft fans, even recordings of fire or wind. Create spaces that feel protective, not sterile. The Viking longhouse was more than architecture. It was a cradle for life, a container for family, and a temple for rest. Inside its walls, people did not just survive the cold, they found peace in the middle of it. And perhaps that is why, even 1,000 years later, we still find ourselves drawn to the idea of gathering around firelight, wrapped in warmth, with the storm safely on the other side of the wall. In the last part, we explored the architecture of the Viking longhouse, thick timbers, moss-filled seams, and a glowing hearth that turned shelter into sanctuary. But even with the best-built home, the rhythm of sleep was not the same year-round. For the Vikings, rest was shaped by something far more powerful than walls or blankets. The shifting cycles of the seasons. Unlike us, they did not try to impose a single ideal sleep schedule on every day of the year. They let nature set the tempo. Long winter nights called for one pattern, while endless summer daylight demanded another. And between these extremes, they practiced something that modern researchers are rediscovering: segmented sleep. Let us start with winter. In Scandinavia, darkness can stretch 18 to 20 hours. Imagine living in a world where night is not just 8 hours of quiet, but nearly an entire day of shadow. For the Vikings, this was not depressing, it was opportunity. With limited daylight for work, they slowed down. They ate less, moved less, and most importantly, they slept more. But this was not a solid, unbroken slumber. It came in phases. Anthropologists studying pre-industrial societies describe a common rhythm known as first sleep and second sleep. After dusk, families would drift into a deep, early rest. A few hours later, they would stir, adding wood to the fire, whispering stories, praying, or simply lying awake. This period of gentle wakefulness might last an hour or two. Then came the second sleep, stretching until dawn. The Vikings almost certainly followed this rhythm. Instead of panicking when they woke at midnight, they leaned into it. The night was long enough to hold both dreaming and waking. Picture the scene: a longhouse in January. The fire has burned low, leaving only a red glow. Around the hearth, bodies stir. A father sits up and adds a log, sparks rising to the rafters. A mother whispers a lullaby to a restless child. An elder begins telling a quiet story, his voice low and steady. Others listen in drowsy silence, half awake, half dreaming. After an hour, voices fade, the fire crackles steady, and the family drifts back into second sleep. No one is anxious about losing rest. In fact, this pause makes the second sleep deeper, more refreshing. Now turn the calendar to summer. The opposite is true. In June, the sun barely sets, twilight blends into dawn, and true darkness is fleeting. For the Vikings, this meant shorter sleep, but still profound rest. Work in the fields stretched late into the evening, and people rose early to seize the precious season of growth. Sleep came in shorter bursts, sometimes even outdoors under the twilight sky. Yet because their bodies were aligned with the natural light, this reduced sleep still left them energized. In this way, Viking life was flexible. Sleep was never rigid or forced into a single mold. It expanded in winter, contracted in summer, and broke into segments when nights stretched endlessly. Their bodies adjusted because their minds accepted it. There was no obsession with 8 hours straight. Rest was a living, changing thing, responsive to environment. Modern science is beginning to confirm what the Vikings already practiced. Studies show that segmented sleep is natural for the human body. Our ancestors across many cultures often woke in the middle of the night, used that time for quiet thought or connection, then slipped back into dreams. Some researchers even argue that our modern struggle with insomnia may come from fighting this natural rhythm. Instead of accepting midnight wakefulness, we panic, turning on lights, checking clocks, stressing ourselves into sleeplessness. The Vikings did the opposite. They welcomed the pause. There is also a psychological benefit to seasonal rhythms. In winter, long nights gave families time to reflect, bond, and conserve energy. In summer, short sleep was balanced by vibrant activity and abundance of food. Each season had its own gift. By flowing with these cycles, Vikings avoided the burnout of constant sameness. Their bodies rested in tune with the earth's turning. Here's a vivid story. Imagine a young Viking farmer in July. He spends the day in the fields, harvesting barley. The sun barely dips below the horizon, leaving a soft golden glow. After a long meal, he lies down on straw, but only for a few hours. The birds call before dawn, and he rises again, refreshed. He does not complain about too little sleep, because his body, aligned with sunlight, gives him what he needs. Contrast that with a modern worker, exhausted despite 8 hours in a climate-controlled room, disconnected from nature's cues. Which one seems more attuned? Of course, segmented and seasonal sleep was not perfect. Winter could breed melancholy, and summer could exhaust. But the Vikings had coping strategies. Stories, rituals, and togetherness made long nights bearable. Communal effort and celebration gave energy to short summer rests. By accepting change, they turned challenge into rhythm. So what can we take from this? First, do not fear segmented sleep. If you wake at night, use it. Read, journal, meditate, or simply rest quietly. Let your body return naturally. Second, honor seasonal shifts. If winter makes you sleep more, do not guilt yourself. If summer gives you extra energy, channel it. Your body is not broken. It is responding to ancient patterns. Third, create rituals that soften these transitions. Just as the Vikings told stories by the fire, we can dim lights, share conversations, or reflect during wakeful moments. The lesson is simple. Sleep is not one size fits all. It is as fluid as the seasons, as adaptive as the sun and moon. The Vikings, living without clocks, knew this instinctively. Their rest bent with nature, and in bending, it became stronger. So as we close this chapter, imagine lying in a Viking longhouse during the longest night of winter. You have just stirred from first to sleep, and the fire's glow flickers on the beams. A quiet story drifts through the air. You feel no panic, no rush, just acceptance. Soon, you will drift back into second sleep, carried by the rhythm of the season, and when dawn finally comes, it feels earned, natural, and whole. In the previous section, we saw how the Vikings practiced segmented and seasonal sleep, adapting naturally to light, darkness, and the rhythms of farming life. But now it is time to turn back to our world. The most important question is, what does all of this mean for us today? The wooden longhouses, the nights without electricity, and the fires that glowed through the dark have all disappeared. But the lessons remain, and we can still draw from them to improve our own rest. The first lesson, respect darkness. The Vikings did not fight the night. They let it embrace them and guide their bodies. Today, artificial light surrounds us 24/7, confusing our systems and delaying the production of melatonin. If we want deeper sleep, we must learn to reduce evening light, step away from screens, and create a space of darkness and warmth, like the glow of a longhouse fire, a small amber lamp, a few safe candles, or simply closing the curtains earlier. These little changes can make a big difference. The second lesson, keep bedrooms cool. The Vikings slept in cold conditions, and that actually helped them. Modern science proves that a cooler environment around 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit / 16 to 19 degrees Celsius allows the body to slip more quickly into restorative sleep. Instead of cranking heaters or wrapping yourself in an electric blanket, try layering breathable covers and letting part of your body, your face or hands, rest in cooler air. That balance between warmth and chill mirrors the Viking nights, a warm core, fresh air in the lungs, and deeper rest. The third lesson, embrace flexibility. The Vikings did not cling to one ideal way to sleep. They shifted positions, changed spots, and accepted waking up in the middle of the night. We, on the other hand, panic when insomnia strikes, staring at the clock and counting every lost minute. What if we saw it differently? If you wake at 3 a.m., treat it as a natural pause. Read a little, journal, breathe quietly, then let your body return when it is ready. By doing this, you stop treating sleep like an enemy and start treating it like a rhythm. The fourth lesson, create evening rituals. For the Vikings, evenings meant gathering by the fire, sharing stories, singing softly, and laughing with one another. It was their way of signaling to mind and body the day is done. We need rituals too. Maybe it is a few minutes of conversation with family, reading instead of scrolling, or listening to calm music instead of late-night news. These small habits act like a bridge, carrying us from the busy rhythm of the day to the quiet rhythm of the night. The fifth lesson: connection over isolation. Vikings slept together, wrapped in shared warmth and surrounded by familiar sounds. We do not need to live in a single-room longhouse anymore, but we can still invite connection. Let pets curl at the foot of the bed. Play natural soundscapes, rainfall, crackling fire, gentle wind, or simply remind yourself that loved ones are close. That feeling of safety quiets the brain and allows it to let go. The sixth lesson: choose natural materials. Vikings slept on wool, fur, and straw. Today we have cotton, linen, or down, modern versions of the same principle. The point is to choose fabrics that breathe, insulate without suffocating, and give a sense of closeness to nature. Avoid synthetic fabrics that trap heat and sweat. Sleep is not only about science, it is about sensation. And natural textures calm the body more deeply than artificial ones. The seventh lesson: listen to your dreams. For the Vikings, dreams were messages from gods or ancestors. We do not need to believe in prophecy to borrow their attitude. Respect your dreams as reflections of emotion, stress, or desire. Write them down. Share them with someone you trust. Sometimes dreams reveal what our waking minds have not had time to process. Respecting dreams is, in a way, respecting yourself. And the final lesson: see sleep as part of life, not a challenge to conquer. The Vikings did not worry about hacking their sleep or tracking the perfect number of hours. They worked, they lived by the seasons, and they allowed rest to come naturally. We can do the same by letting go of obsession with numbers and instead focusing on quality, the environment, the light, the temperature, the connection. Imagine this: tonight, you walk into your bedroom and switch off the bright lights. You crack the window for a breath of cool air. You set your phone aside. You share a few minutes of conversation with someone you love, or you pet your dog before lying under soft, layered blankets. The room grows darker, quieter. A gentle hum, maybe a fan, maybe the night breeze, fills the silence. You feel safe, and in that moment, your room becomes a modern longhouse, not made of wood, not filled with livestock, but carrying the same spirit, natural, connected, and peaceful. The Vikings, despite the harshness of their world, found a way to rest deeply, to sleep fully, to wake ready for whatever came next. If they could find that peace in the cold and the dark, we can find it too right here in the middle of our modern lives. So here is the final lesson. Sleep is not something to fight for. Sleep is a gift, a connection to nature, to others, and to your own spirit. If you learn to listen, to soften the edges of your nights, you will discover what the Vikings knew all along. You do not just need more sleep. You need better sleep, deeper, truer, and more complete. And so, our journey through the Viking night comes to an end. We have stepped inside smoky longhouses, sat by glowing hearths, listened to whispered stories, and felt the mix of cold air and warm blankets. We have seen how their lives flowed with the seasons, how their dreams held meaning, and how their homes themselves were built to nurture rest. More than just survival, the Vikings created nights filled with rhythm, connection, and peace. What does this teach us? That sleep is not just about closing your eyes. It is about creating the right atmosphere, darkness that calms, cold that restores, rituals that soothe, and relationships that reassure. The Vikings did not have science labs or sleep apps, but they instinctively aligned with what the body and spirit truly need. And if they could find deep, healing rest in a harsh and unpredictable world, then maybe we can too. So tonight, as you get ready for bed, remember these lessons. Dim the lights earlier. Let the room be a little cooler. Step away from screens. Share a word, a laugh, or even a silence with someone close. Respect your dreams. And most of all, let go of the pressure to perfect your sleep. Instead, welcome it as the Vikings did, a natural rhythm, a nightly gift, and a chance to reconnect with yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Viking nights. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like the video, subscribe for more fascinating explorations of history and life, and share your own sleep rituals in the comments. Until next time, rest well, dream deeply, and remember, sometimes the best lessons come not from the day but from the night.